Hey guys, tonight we step into the flickering glow of ancient fires, the kind that have been dancing across Australian landscapes for tens of thousands of years. Imagine yourself standing in the dry heat of an outback afternoon, the smell of burnt leaves curling gently in the air, while the sky slowly turns a dusty orange. You might think fire here means destruction, but for Indigenous Australians it's much more a tool, a caretaker, and sometimes a gentle artist, painting the land with controlled flames. You probably won't survive this ancient practice if you tried it yourself. But tonight, we're safely tucked in to learn how fire shaped an entire continent long before bulldozers and tractors ever appeared. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, pop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun to see where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by stepping back in time, tens of thousands of years ago, when the earliest Indigenous Australians first began harnessing fire in a deliberate, intelligent way. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence suggesting that controlled burning wasn't just a random accident of lightning strikes, but a practiced skill and ancient form of land management that helped shape the environment. This wasn't your typical let it burn and hope for the best wildfire scenario. Rather, it was an intricate dance with flames. This practice, sometimes called fire stick farming, is believed to have begun at least 40,000 years ago. Imagine people observing how certain plants and animals responded to fire, learning when and where to set gentle fires to encourage new growth or flush out game. Historians still argue whether these techniques developed independently across different regions or spread from one group to another, but the outcome was undeniably sophisticated. Interestingly, while today we often associate fire with destruction for these ancient peoples, fire was a nurturing force. Controlled burning reduced the risk of large, uncontrollable wildfires by clearing out underbrush and promoting a healthier ecosystem. Some plants, like certain grasses and eucalyptus, actually depend on regular burns to germinate and thrive. You might find it odd that burning would help plants grow, but it's a natural cycle that humans tuned in to becoming co-creators with the land, rather than mere observers. Here's a quirky detail. Some scientists suggest that the very spread of eucalyptus trees across Australia was influenced by indigenous fire practices, encouraging their dominance over older forest types. It's like a slow-motion gardening project that rewrote entire landscapes over millennia. So next time you smell that distinctive eucalyptus aroma, remember it's partly a legacy of ancient fires managed by skilled hands. Meanwhile, the sensory experience of fire, its crackling sound, warmth, and smoke, was deeply woven into Indigenous culture. Fire wasn't just a tool. It was a living presence in stories, ceremonies, and daily life. It's no surprise that flames were both feared and revered. As you picture yourself by a fire, imagine the conversations, the songs, and the knowledge passed on through generations under starry skies, with firelight dancing on faces. This early mastery of fire shows that humans and nature have long shared a relationship that goes beyond survival. It's a relationship of stewardship, respect, and understanding. The ancient fires of Australia weren't just about burning. They were about crafting a world where people and ecosystems thrived together. As the sun climbs higher, you follow the rhythm of the seasons that Indigenous Australians have observed for countless generations. Fire wasn't just set willy-nilly. It followed a careful schedule tuned perfectly to the land's natural cycles. Seasonal burning patterns dictated when and where fires were lit, balancing safety with ecological benefits. You're about to learn how the land's own calendar shaped the flames, a slow dance that kept the environment healthy and people well fed. The year was divided into seasons, not just the 4 we know, but often 6 or more depending on the region. Each season came with its own weather-animal behaviors and plant growth cycles. In northern Australia, for example, Indigenous peoples recognized distinct wet and dry seasons, plus transitional periods. They timed burns mostly during the early dry season when grasses had dried enough to burn, but before the heat of mid-dry season turned fires into raging infernos. This early burning was gentle, patchy, and carefully controlled. This practice is sometimes called cool burning, and it worked wonders. Instead of one massive wildfire tearing through the bush, these small scattered fires cleared old grasses and undergrowth gradually. You could almost think of it as pruning the land, encouraging new growth without overwhelming the ecosystem. This also reduced fuel buildup, lowering the risk of catastrophic fires later in the dry season when everything was tinder dry. Historians still argue whether these seasonal burning cycles were passed down through generations as rigid rules, or if Indigenous peoples adapted flexibly to local conditions. It's probably a bit of both, depending on place and time. But what's clear is the deep environmental knowledge embedded in these patterns. On a quirky note, some Indigenous groups would actually use fire to create fire breaks, burnt strips of land that stopped wildfires in their tracks. Imagine that a natural firewall designed long before we had bulldozers or firefighting planes. It's an early example of humans working with fire, not against it. The smoke from these cool burns wasn't just a byproduct, it helped to communicate across the landscape. Different communities could signal their presence or intentions through smoke patterns, almost like a quiet, smoke-based messaging system. So, while the fire gently shaped the land below, the smoke drifted above, carrying messages through the air. You might find it surprising that some animals actually follow these seasonal burns, moving into newly cleared areas to feed on fresh shoots or hunt exposed prey. This delicate balance between fire plants and animals created an ever-changing mosaic, a patchwork quilt of habitats, all maintained through fire and respect. By following the seasonal rhythms, Indigenous Australians demonstrated not only a mastery of fire, but also an intimate understanding of their environment's pulse. The flames were never random chaos, but part of a long, slow conversation between humans, plants, animals, and seasons. You've seen how fire and seasons intertwine, but now it's time to dive into the heart of the practice itself, fire stick farming. No, it's not about farming sticks or setting random blazes. It's a methodical, careful use of controlled burns to shape the land like a gentle gardener wielding a brush. Imagine yourself holding a smoldering branch, the fire stick ready to nudge the fire along just where it's needed. Never too fast, never too wild. This technique involved lighting small fires in specific places to clear undergrowth, promote new grass and encourage plants that were useful for food medicine or tools. The fires were usually low and slow, designed to avoid harming mature trees or delicate habitats. It's a bit like pruning your garden to keep it healthy, but on a landscape scale. What's fascinating is how fire stick farming wasn't just about maintenance. It was a form of environmental engineering. By burning in patches, indigenous people could create a mosaic of burnt and unburnt land, which encouraged biodiversity. New grasses sprouted quickly, attracting herbivores like kangaroos, which in turn drew predators. The land became a dynamic habitat constantly renewed by fire. Historians still argue whether this mosaic burning was designed primarily for hunting benefits, or if it also had deeper cultural or spiritual motivations. Some researchers suggest it was a holistic practice that blended practical survival with respect for the land's spiritual rhythms. A quirky detail in some regions, fire stick farming was used to encourage the growth of particular edible plants that needed fire to germinate, like certain types of wattles or acacias. It's as if the land was a carefully curated pantry, with fire as the chef's secret ingredient. The technique also helped reduce pests and diseases by burning away dead material where insects or pathogens might hide. In this way, fire became a kind of natural cleanser, keeping the environment healthier than if left untouched. You might be surprised to learn that fire stick farming has parallels in other ancient cultures worldwide, though the scale and integration in Australia are particularly striking. It's a testament to how Indigenous Australians developed one of the world's earliest and most sophisticated land management systems, long before modern science caught up. So, next time you imagine fire, don't think of destruction. Think of a gentle, rhythmic gardener's hand carefully guiding flames to breathe new life into the earth. You're starting to notice a pattern here. Fire isn't just a single event, but a carefully crafted tapestry. This brings us to the concept of fire mosaics, a patchwork quilt of burnt and unburnt land that looks chaotic from afar, but is beautifully organized up close. Picture a giant natural jigsaw puzzle, where each piece represents a different stage of regrowth, inviting animals and plants to thrive in their own time. Fire mosaics emerge when fires are set in small, deliberate patches, rather than sweeping across the landscape all at once. These patches vary in size and age, creating a diverse habitat mosaic. Some patches might be freshly burnt with tender new shoots, while others could be several years old, thick with mature plants. This variety encourages a wide range of species to coexist, each finding its preferred niche. Ecologists today praise this kind of mosaic burning for promoting biodiversity. New growth attracts grazing animals, which in turn support predators, creating a balanced food web. Some birds, like the black cockatoo, rely on older forests, while others prefer younger burnt areas. The mosaic ensures all have a place. Historians and scientists still debate the exact motivations behind this patchwork approach. Was it purely a practical technique for hunting and food gathering, or did it also reflect cultural and spiritual relationships with the land? Likely, it was a mix, practical needs intertwined with deep respect for the environment. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some indigenous groups intentionally left unburnt patches as refuges for animals, knowing these pockets would help repopulate burnt areas later. It's like setting aside little animal safe zones in the landscape, a bit of ancient wildlife conservation. Interestingly, the patchiness also helped reduce the spread of disease and pests by interrupting their habitats. Fire mosaics acted as natural pest control, allowing plants and animals to flourish in a healthier balance. When European settlers arrived, they often misread these mosaics as signs of neglect or chaos, not understanding the skill and knowledge behind the fires. This misunderstanding led to changes in fire management that disrupted these finely balanced ecosystems. So, as you imagine this quilt of flame and growth, remember it's less about destruction and more about renewal. A slow, patient artistry practiced for thousands of years. The gentle dance of fire doesn't stop with patterns. It reaches deep into the very plants that define the Australian landscape. You're about to discover how fire shaped not only the land, but the plants themselves, encouraging some species to flourish while nudging others into the background. It's a story of botanical partnership between fire and flora, woven over millennia. Many native plants evolved to thrive with fire as a regular visitor. For instance, eucalyptus trees have thick, fire-resistant bark that protects their vital tissues from heat. After a fire, these trees often sprout new shoots from their bases or shed seeds that germinate in the nutrient-rich ash. Imagine standing in a recently burnt forest and seeing fresh green leaves pushing up through blackened ground, a testament to fire's regenerative power. Historians still argue whether some of these adaptations developed solely because of natural wildfires, or if indigenous burning accelerated the process. Either way, the relationship is undeniable. Fire is both a destroyer and a creator. Take the kangaroo grass, a staple of many indigenous diets. This grass responds beautifully to fire quickly regrowing and producing tender shoots that attract grazing animals. The controlled burns helped maintain open grasslands, where kangaroo grass and other useful plants could thrive, making hunting easier and food more reliable. On the quirky side, some Aboriginal groups used fire to encourage the growth of bush foods like wattle seed or yam daisies. These plants often need fire to crack their tough seed coats before they can sprout. It's as if fire was a natural pre-treatment, softening the soil and waking dormant seeds, much like how you might soak beans overnight before cooking. Another fun fact, some plants produce smoke-responsive seeds, meaning they will only germinate after being exposed to the chemicals in smoke. This clever trick ensures that seedlings sprout after a fire, clears a competing vegetation, giving them a head start in the race for sunlight and nutrients. This intimate relationship between fire and plants wasn't just ecological, it was practical too. By encouraging the right plants to grow, Indigenous Australians effectively curated their environment to support their needs. You might think of it as a natural grocery store stocked and restocked by the flames. So, next time you wander through an Australian bush, take a moment to appreciate the hidden influence of fire. Beneath your feet, the land is whispering stories of ancient flames and plants that learned to dance with the heat. As you follow the trail of smoke and new growth fire's role in hunting becomes clear. This wasn't just about plants, but about the animals that moved among them. Imagine yourself holding a fire stick, setting gentle flames in carefully chosen patches, not just to shape vegetation, but to herd and track game. fire was a clever hunting partner, helping to flush out animals and guide their movements, making the hunt both efficient and sustainable. Controlled burns cleared thick underbrush, revealing paths, and forcing animals like kangaroos, wallabies, and emus to move into open spaces where hunters could more easily spot and catch them. This method is sometimes called fire hunting. You can picture hunters working with fire's rhythm, lighting small fires ahead of game, or blocking escape routes by burning strips of land, creating a natural funnel. Historians still argue whether fire hunting was a universal technique or practiced only in specific regions. But evidence from oral histories and ecological studies supports its widespread use. The relationship between fire and hunting reveals a deep understanding of animal behavior and landscape dynamics. Here's a quirky detail: some indigenous groups timed their burns to coincide with animal breeding seasons, carefully avoiding overhunting while maximizing food availability. It's like an ancient sustainable harvesting plan, balancing needs with the land's capacity. Also fascinating is the idea that fire not only herded animals but influenced their health and behavior. Newly burnt areas produce tender grasses rich in nutrients, attracting herbivores that grow stronger and healthier. This indirectly benefited hunters by concentrating game in predictable locations. The use of fire for hunting also created a rhythm of landscape renewal. After the hunt burned, patches would regrow, supporting a cycle of food availability for both humans and animals. It's a dynamic partnership where fire animals and people all play their parts in a continuous loop. Imagine watching a small fire flicker across the bush, knowing it's quietly steering wildlife like a gentle shepherd. This ancient technique reminds us that humans have long worked with nature's forces, rather than trying to conquer them outright. Fire was never just a tool for survival. It held deep cultural and spiritual significance for Indigenous Australians. As you settle beside a crackling fire in your imagination, you can almost hear the stories and songs that weave fire into the fabric of community life. Fire wasn't merely a practical force, it was a living presence, a symbol of creation, renewal, and connection. Many indigenous groups viewed fire as a gift from ancestral beings or creator spirits. Ceremonies often involved lighting fires to honor these forces or to mark important events. The flickering flames symbolized life's continuity, the cyclical nature of the seasons, and the delicate balance between destruction and growth. Historians still argue about how these spiritual beliefs influenced practical fire management, but it's clear that fire was embedded in both the sacred and the everyday. The care taken in burning the land wasn't just ecological, it was an act of respect and responsibility. A quirky detail: some tribes used smoke signals, not only for communication, but as part of spiritual rituals. Smoke was thought to carry prayers or messages to the ancestors, drifting up to the sky. Imagine sending a silent, smoky letter to the cosmos. It's a beautiful metaphor for connection. Fire also played a role in storytelling and education. Around the firelight, elders passed down knowledge about plants, animals, and landscape through myths and legends. These stories often included instructions on how and when to use fire, blending practical wisdom with cultural identity. You might find it interesting that some indigenous languages have multiple words for different types of fire, reflecting its varied roles, from cooking and warmth to hunting and ceremony. This linguistic richness shows just how central fire was to daily life. So, when you think of fire here, don't just picture flames and smoke. Imagine a sacred circle of light, warmth, and knowledge holding communities together across time and space. Fire was much more than a tool. It was a heartbeat in the rhythm of life. Now you can almost feel the weight of the fire stick in your hand, the specialized tools and techniques that Indigenous Australians perfected to control and spread fire with precision. This wasn't a reckless blaze, but a carefully guided force managed with intimate knowledge, passed down through generations. Fire sticks were often just dry branches or smoldering sticks, but wielded by skilled hands, they became instruments of landscape artistry. Lighting a fire stick meant choosing the right moment, wind conditions, and location to ensure the flames behaved gently, never spiraling into destructive infernos. The smoke, the smell of burning leaves, and the crackle of fire were all cues to guide the burn. Historians still debate how widespread the use of fire sticks was across different regions, as tools and methods varied depending on local environments and cultures. Some groups also used firebrands branches wrapped in bark or leaves to carry fire safely over distances. A quirky detail, in some areas controlled burns were even coordinated between neighboring groups, like an ancient version of fire management teams ensuring that patches burned in sequence to create mosaics and prevent large wildfires. Other techniques involved lighting fires downwind so that they burned softly against the breeze, or using damp leaves to moderate flames. You might picture a slow-moving artist painting the earth with strokes of flame, careful not to cross the lines. Fire was also used to clear campsites of pests and undergrowth, making life safer and more comfortable. This everyday use of fire showed how it was woven into every aspect of life, from survival to comfort. The knowledge required to manage fire this way was enormous, combining observation, intuition, and experience. Young people learned these skills through hands-on practice, often accompanied by stories and warnings to respect the power they wielded. So when you think about fire sticks, remember they were more than tools. They were extensions of human understanding, bridging people and land in a delicate, smoky dance. Fire's rhythm was deeply woven into seasonal food cycles, guiding when and where food was abundant throughout the year. You can almost feel the satisfying crunch of roasted tubers and the rich aroma of smoke-cooked meat as you imagine how Indigenous Australians timed their burns to coincide with nature's bounty. Burning at specific times encouraged new shoots and fresh growth of edible plants like yam daisies, bush onions, and wattle seeds. These plants often thrived after a burn, making food, gathering more predictable and abundant. By understanding the seasons and fire's effects, communities could plan when to harvest, hunt, or move camps. Historians still debate the extent to which fire management was intentionally aligned with food cycles or developed more organically through observation. Either way, fire acted as a natural calendar, marking times for different activities and supporting sustainable harvesting. A quirky tidbit, some groups used fire to flush out insects or larvae from the soil, which were then collected as protein-rich snacks. A practice that sounds strange today, but was perfectly logical in a resourceful, food-smart culture. Interestingly, fire also played a role in fish and bird hunting. Burning near waterholes or wetlands could flush out fish or waterfowl, making them easier to catch. You might think of it as a smoky fishing net with flames nudging aquatic life your way. This alignment of fire and food cycles created a harmonious balance, ensuring that resources were renewed and overexploitation avoided. It was a slow, sustainable rhythm that connected people closely with the land's natural pulse. Imagine yourself moving through this cycle, timing your burns and harvests like a gentle dance with the season's fire, lighting the way to your next meal. As you breathe in the faint scent of smoke lingering in the air, you begin to understand how fire affected not just plants and animals, but the very soil and water that sustained life. Fire's touch was gentle yet transformative, influencing the land's nutrients and moisture in ways that benefited entire ecosystems. Burning cleared away old dead vegetation, allowing sunlight to reach the soil and warming it, which in turn helped seeds to germinate. The ash left behind was rich in minerals like potassium and phosphorus, acting as a natural fertilizer. This boost in soil fertility encouraged fresh growth and improved the quality of forage for grazing animals. Historians still argue about how regular these nutrient boosts were, and how much they contributed to the overall productivity of the land. But it's clear that fire helped maintain a cycle of renewal that kept landscapes vibrant and fertile. On a quirky note, some studies suggest that traditional burns also helped improve water retention in soils. By clearing dense underbrush fires, reduced competition for water, and prevented the soil from becoming too compacted. This allowed rainwater to soak in more effectively, supporting plants through dry seasons. Fire's influence extended to wetlands and waterholes too. Controlled burns around these areas helped maintain open spaces and prevented them from becoming overgrown with invasive plants. This ensured clean water sources for both people and wildlife. You might be surprised to learn that this balance of fire, soil, and water was so finely tuned that it supported some of the world's oldest continuous cultures. The land wasn't just a backdrop. It was a living partner, shaped and nurtured through fire and care. As you imagine, walking through this landscape, feel the warmth of the sun on rich, fertile soil, the gentle crackle of recent burns, and the quiet promise of renewal carried on the breeze. Fire wasn't just a flame, it was the pulse of the earth beneath your feet. The vastness of Australia means fire wasn't a one-size-fits-all tool. Instead, Indigenous fire practices varied widely across regions shaped by climate terrain and local cultures. You're now traveling across diverse landscapes from arid deserts to lush rainforests, each with its own fire story revealing the adaptability and ingenuity of indigenous fire management. In the dry central deserts, for instance, fire was used sparingly and carefully, as vegetation was sparse and recovery slow. Here, burns were smaller and timed to avoid damaging fragile plants. Conversely, in northern tropical regions, frequent burning helped maintain open woodlands and grasslands, supporting rich biodiversity. Historians still argue about how fire use differed between coastal and inland groups, but it's clear that no two fire practices were identical. Local knowledge governed when and how fires were set, responding to the unique needs of each environment. A quirky fact: some desert groups used fire to create black soil patches that retained moisture, and attracted animals a clever way to improve hunting grounds in harsh conditions. Imagine turning barren land into a wildlife magnet, just with smoke and flame. In wetter areas like the southeastern forests, fire was used less often, but still played a role in clearing undergrowth and encouraging edible plants. Here, fire stick techniques had to be even more precise to avoid damaging sensitive ecosystems. This regional variation shows the incredible flexibility of indigenous fire knowledge. Fire wasn't just a blunt instrument, but a finely tuned tool adapted to suit diverse environments and cultures. Picture yourself moving from the dry, smoky deserts to the green, misty forests, watching how fire's role shifts and changes. It's a reminder that Indigenous Australians weren't simply fire users, but expert land managers who read and responded to the land's unique voice. As you wander through the patchwork landscapes shaped by fire, you start to notice how animals themselves adapted to this ever-changing environment. Fire didn't just influence plants or people. It shaped animal behavior, migration, and survival in subtle and fascinating ways. Many species, like kangaroos and wallabies, have learned to use recently burnt areas to find tender new shoots that are easier to digest and richer in nutrients. It's like their own personal salad bar, freshly stocked by the flames. You can almost see them hopping eagerly from one green patch to another, following the smoke's trail of renewal. Historians still debate how much animal behavior was shaped directly by indigenous fire practices versus natural wildfires. But the evidence suggests a close relationship. Animals that adapted to fire mosaic landscapes thrived while those less flexible struggled. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some bird species, such as the black kite, have been observed to deliberately spread fires by picking up burning sticks and dropping them in dry grass to flush out prey, a behavior known as fire foraging. While not directly related to human fire management, it highlights the complex role fire plays in the ecosystem. Fire also created safe refuges for some animals in unburnt patches, allowing populations to recover and maintain diversity. These natural fire shelters were vital for the resilience of many species. The continuous cycle of burning and regrowth encouraged animals to develop migratory patterns that followed the changing landscape, ensuring access to food and shelter throughout the year. You might imagine the landscape as a living, breathing entity, where fire is both sculptor and choreographer, guiding the movements and behaviors of its animal inhabitants in a slow, rhythmic dance. With the arrival of European settlers, the ancient rhythm of indigenous fire management faced dramatic disruption. You can almost feel the tension in the air as new policies unfamiliar to local ecosystems replaced centuries-old practices, altering the land and its caretakers forever. Settlers often misunderstood traditional burning, seeing the patchwork mosaics as signs of neglect or waste, rather than skillful stewardship. They introduced fire suppression policies, putting out small controlled burns, and inadvertently allowing fuel to build up. This led to more frequent catastrophic wildfires, fires the land and its people were never meant to handle. Historians still argue about how much these colonial disruptions contributed to ecological changes versus natural shifts, but the connection is undeniable. Traditional knowledge was sidelined, and with it, the intimate relationship between indigenous people and the land suffered. A quirky and somewhat tragic detail some settlers banned, burning altogether, forcing indigenous communities to abandon their ancestral fire sticks, which not only altered the landscape but also severed cultural and spiritual ties. It's like taking away a painter's brush and expecting the masterpiece to paint itself. This change also impacted animal populations, food sources, and plant diversity. Without the regular burns, thick undergrowth choked the land, making hunting and gathering more difficult. Fires became less predictable and more destructive. Yet, despite these challenges, indigenous fire knowledge survived, carried quietly in stories, ceremonies, and memory. Today, many communities are working to revive these ancient practices, reclaiming fire's role as a healing force rather than a threat. Imagine standing at the edge of a smoldering patch, feeling the weight of history loss and hope all mingling in the smoke. The story of fire is far from over. It's evolving like the land itself. As the world awakens to the benefits of ancient wisdom, indigenous fire knowledge is experiencing a remarkable revival in contemporary land management. You can almost hear the crackling fires once again guiding the rhythms of the land, blending tradition with modern science to heal ecosystems and communities alike. Today, indigenous ranger programs and land councils are leading controlled burn initiatives that echo the slow, deliberate techniques practiced for millennia. These burns help reduce wildfire risks, promote biodiversity, and restore cultural connections to country. Fire is no longer seen solely as a hazard, but embraced as a tool for regeneration. Historians and ecologists still debate how to best integrate traditional fire knowledge with contemporary environmental policies. The challenges include balancing cultural values, legal frameworks, and climate change impacts. But the collaborative efforts underway are promising. A quirky and hopeful detail: some projects use satellite imaging and drones to map fire mosaics, blending ancient practice with cutting-edge technology. It's a beautiful fusion of old and new, with smoke signals now replaced by digital data. These modern burns not only protect wildlife habitats, but also support cultural practices, allowing communities to reconnect with ancestral land stewardship. The fires light the way for cultural revival, healing, and education. You might find it comforting that indigenous fire management offers a roadmap to living gently with fire, respecting its power while harnessing its gifts. It's a lesson in patience, observation, and humility, reminding us that sometimes the slowest burn is the most profound. As you imagine these flames glowing warmly in the dusk, feel the strength of tradition rekindled, and the quiet hope burning bright for future generations. As you settle deeper into this journey, it's time to reflect on the future of fire stewardship in Australia, an evolving story full of challenges, debates, and hopes. Fire remains a powerful force, and Indigenous-led management offers a way to live in harmony with it, balancing ancient wisdom with modern realities. The future holds ongoing discussions about land rights, cultural recognition, and environmental policies that affect how fire is used. Indigenous communities continue advocating for greater control over their traditional lands, emphasizing that fire management is more than ecology. It's a cultural responsibility. Historians still argue about the best ways to incorporate indigenous knowledge into national fire strategies, especially as climate change intensifies wildfire risks. But one thing is clear: collaboration between indigenous custodians and scientists is essential for sustainable solutions. A quirky note of optimism. Some new fire programs include cultural exchanges, where indigenous fire practitioners teach firefighters and land managers their techniques, turning smoke signals into shared knowledge. It's a hopeful fusion of perspectives. You might imagine the landscape as a living classroom, where every burn teaches respect, renewal, and balance. The future of fire stewardship is not about domination, but partnership. A slow, steady flame lighting the way forward. So, as you drift toward sleep, let these smoky embers remind you of a profound truth fire, when guided by respect and knowledge, can be a gentle force of life and healing, connecting past, present, and future in a timeless dance.